So obviously no one is moving because no one exactly like you. We all have differences, but you are here because you have something in common. And that way, you have two things. You're women, and you are mothers of preschoolers. So you automatically have some things in common. So even though I'm technically here to talk about disabilities or special needs, really what I'm talking about are differences. Can I ask you your name?
Kayla.
Kayla? And who's sitting next to you, Kayla?
Oh, Margaret.
And so obviously the two of you have differences. Height, hair color, but yet, are you friends? Do you like each other?
Yeah.
You like it? So you could easily choose. You could easily choose to focus on your differences, but you have chosen to focus on those things that are in common. And so that's what I think sometimes as humans we do, is we make certain differences seem bigger in our head than they really need to be. And that's what disabilities are. They're a difference that seem big, and so in our head we make them frightening, we make them large, and they're really not that much. We need to focus on the things that we have in common. So I'm going to put somebody on the spot. Who's brave? Okay, great, you're brave. So I want you to think about a trait that you have that that maybe could be viewed as a challenge or a negative trait. As women, we tend to pick automatically a physical thing. I want something that's invisible, that maybe not everyone would see unless they took the time to get to know you.
Okay.
So while you're thinking about that real quick, I'm just going to... Oh, just take it. Then go for it.
Anger.
Anger, okay. So who's sitting next to you?
This is Kimmy, my friend.
Hi, Kimmy. Let's pretend you're not her friend and you haven't met her yet. And I'm going to introduce you. And so, Kimmy, I would like you to meet this really angry lady next to you named Bree. Now, obviously, I would never introduce Bree that way. And even though she has now admitted that that's a part of what makes her a whole package, you would not focus on that. So that's your first etiquette lesson of the day, is it's always the person first. I would never introduce my son to you as, I'd like you to meet my autistic son, Jason. I wouldn't do that. My son does live with autism. It's a challenge when our kids have those invisible disabilities. There are people that I would need to, at introduction, make it clear that he has an invisible disability. So if I'm introducing him to a medical professional or a police officer or a fireman and we're in a situation, that would need to come out, but it would be person first. This is my son, Jason, who lives with some challenges of having autism. So there's other things that make Jason who he is. He is creative, he's an old soul, he's a good writer, he's a fabulous artist. So when you see a person that's living with a disability, the first thing to do is try to focus on finding something that they have in common and take the focus off the difference. So I appreciate that your leadership team gave me some questions. When I read them, I kind of laughed because I thought, gosh, if I could answer these in 30 minutes, that would be a miracle. So we're going to just focus on a couple of them because they're great questions. But one of them is, what are the best ways for us to introduce our children to special needs kids and talk about what special needs means so that we teach tolerance, patience, love, and serving others early on, embracing differences in people. And I'm going to start with the end of that question where it says embracing people with differences. You're already automatically doing that when you come in here. Because you're focusing on what you have in common, you're automatically embracing the differences. And so I would recommend that you look at all people that way, whether they're a visible disability or as you get to know someone and it's an invisible disability that might manifest itself out in a behavior that makes you uncomfortable. Try to find the common ground. So I want to tell you a real quick story before I give you some practical tips. And this story is actually found in the Bible, and it's about a gentleman who lives with the disability, or lived with the disability of being paralyzed. And, you know, it's okay if I'm not showing up. That's... Okay, darn. This gentleman lived as a gentleman that was paralyzed. And what was happening in his society that day, or in his town that day, was Jesus was there teaching, and that was a big deal. And so whether people believed Jesus was a savior or not, they still wanted to hear what he had to say. He was a good teacher. So that was what everyone in town was doing that day. They were going to go hear Jesus. So these four men are bebopping up their way over to the house where Jesus is, and they see this gentleman living with this difference of a disability. So they go, hey, he should be able to do what the rest of us are doing. So they pick up his mat and they haul him to this house. And when they get there, they realize the crowd is so huge that they can't get him in. So they could have easily said, bummer, this guy lives with a disability. He doesn't get to participate in what everybody else gets to participate in. And they could have said, sorry, dude, and walked away. But they didn't do that. They actually carried him to the roof and dug a hole in the roof and lowered him down so that he could participate with what everybody else in town was doing. And so, in terms of Scripture, the story is in there to teach us about faith and the spiritual healing of the man. But for what we're talking about today is really just some practical tips that they saw someone that should have been included in what was happening in their community, and they decided to be creative, they decided to think outside of the box, and they made a strategic choice to find a way to include him in what the rest of the community was doing. And sometimes, all too often, when we come across a person with a visible disability or a behavioral disability, we just go, bummer, we can't include them. And that's what I would challenge all of us in, is being more like those four men and going, he should have a right, this person should have a right to participate in as much of the rest of the things that society is doing. So let's think outside the box, let's be creative, let's make some strategic choices. And so some of the ways that we can do that, as moms, you have the hardest, most important job out there. And your children learn more in the first 2 years of their life than at any other time. So this is a time that they're sponges, and you have an opportunity to teach them a lot of things. And most of what you're going to teach them is going to be through modeling and the behaviors that you exhibit. So, simple, practical thing. You're at the grocery store, you see someone with a visible disability, model for your child the act of going over and saying hello. It's very simple. But I'm betting if one of you had walked in here today and it was your first day here and no one spoke to you, no one made eye contact with you, if you sat down and everybody else sat on the other half of the room, you would probably, first of all, never come back. But you would have suffered some emotional damage. And later we're going to talk about bullying, but you would have experienced a form of bullying simply by being ignored. We are a society that all too often, because we're uncomfortable with the difference that we have made too big in our head, we choose to do that very thing to people, and therefore the families that are with them, or the caregivers that are with them. So when you approach someone who has a visible disability, and you're going to go out of your comfort zone and you're going to say hi to the person with the disability. They probably have a caregiver with them, and if that caregiver needs to intervene to make it a successful experience, they will do so, but you will greatly bless the family member as well as the person that's living with that disability if you address them. But mainly you will have modeled for your children that all people matter and that they don't need to be afraid. Often our kids will see a person with a visible disability, and sometimes those visible disabilities are come with some deformities that can make a person look frightening to a young child. And so they're going to look to you as a mom to see how you respond. So model that they don't need to be afraid. Go up and say hi. So that's just a practical thing. Another really practical thing that you can do to help your kids understand differences and special needs is to read to them. Hopefully you're all having story times at your home, and I went online and there are so many books that are designed from infant on up about special needs, about having a special needs sibling, about having special needs themselves, or having friends with special needs. So by reading to them these stories before they've ever even encountered someone that has a substantial difference in society, read to them, and it'll do two things. It will make you as a mom more comfortable talking about it and getting familiar with the terminology, but it will equip them for that first day of kindergarten when they may meet Susie, who might be in a wheelchair, or they meet Johnny, who might not be able to sit down because he's just got too much bounce in his little life. So prepare them ahead of time by reading to them. And another one would be answer their questions truthfully. Kids are direct, they're bold, they don't always ask the questions at the most appropriate time, but answer their questions. You're at the store, you see a person in a wheelchair, your kiddo says, "Why is that person in that chair?" Answer them. Say, "Probably because their legs don't work." That might be all your child needs to hear, but don't be shocked by their questions, don't be embarrassed. Answer them truthfully. It's a little harder when you see someone who perhaps has more deformities, and they say, "Why does that person look that way?" Be honest, say, "I don't know." But because we're modeling, the best thing you can do is say, "I don't know, but let's go say good morning." Model not to be afraid, model inclusion, model that difference doesn't have to be as big as we're making in our head. So I could give you more examples, but we got to move on because there was so many good questions. So another one was, how do we teach our children to stand up for others on the playground when they can't stand up for themselves? Then when they are bullied, how are we supposed to be there for our kids and support them through that? And how do we support the mom and the families going through that? So that's a huge question. The world is full of bullies, always has been, and this side of heaven always will be. So I can guarantee you at some point your child, whether they have a special needs or not, will experience bullying, either personally or they will witness it. So again, one of the best things you can do is read. Have that be part of your story times. I again looked online, there are so many books, infant on up, on bullying and how to be a nice person and what to do when someone's being unkind to someone else. So equip them for those things that are hard before they happen. I used to pray all the time, and it sounded like a really good prayer in my head, but I used to pray all the time that God would protect my children physically, emotionally, and spiritually. And it sounds like a good mom prayer, right? But reality is, we live in a broken world, and God actually promises us that troubles will come our way. So rather than praying something that's already been told us isn't going to happen, there's going to be challenges and hard times, we're better off equipping them. And so the issue of bullying will come up in your child's life, so equip them before they need to have that experience. I used to work with an occupational therapist on a volunteer basis, but she used to talk about giving our kids an invisible toolbox. And when you think about if your husbands have toolboxes, they got tools for different situations. You know, you got the hammer for pounding. I don't know anything about tools, so my visual here is pretty poor. But you want to give your kids tools for those hard times because they will have hard times. And so the challenge is not creating fear in their life, but equipping them. You want to equip them for the situations that will come their way. So prepare them ahead of time. Read those stories so you're comfortable with it, talking about it, and they are comfortable coming to you about it as well. Another big thing is, you know, since we're modeling for our children, is when your child comes home and they perhaps have been bullied. My son's been bullied a lot. And it's really easy in those times for your split personality to come out. For me, there's this Christian mom, but there is still this mama bear in there. And sometimes that mama bear can roar really loudly. And as tempting as it is to let that be the witness that comes out, I challenge you to not do that because it's about modeling. And your child, if your child has been bullied or teased, they already feel like this person that's bullying them has won. Well, if you lose your cool in front of your kid, the bully won twice as much. So you need to make it smaller by staying calm and again, giving them those tools. And a lot of it's going to depend on the type of bullying that has happened, so I can't give you like necessary steps. The basics are, if you're being bullied, someone's teasing you, walk away, walk away, walk away. Because it's not about, you need to reinforce to your kids that it's not about them. It's about the bully. Bullies, if you don't react to a bully, they're going to give up on you and they're going to move on to someone else. Now, we don't want them actually moving on to someone else, but that's what they do. And so, if you can, first of all, the simple thing is try to teach your kids to walk away. If someone else is being bullied, especially a kid who is physically or emotionally not equipped because of a disability or a special need, immediately, of course, teach your kids to find an adult, find a trusted adult. But then some of the other stuff, you can't prepare them for every scenario, and you don't want to, because again, you don't want to create fear, but you know, you have to give them some sort of tools. So those are probably some really basics. And probably the most important thing that you can do is be your child's safe haven. Keep the lines of communication open with your children so that if an issue of bullying for them or their friend with special needs comes up, that they know they can talk to you about anything. I took a preschool training years ago, and one of the things they said is that no matter what a young child says to you, don't ever have a shocked expression on your face. Just answer them directly, talk calmly, but you know, don't get shocked, because you want your kids talking to you, even if you don't like the topic. You want them getting their advice from you, not from their peers or from someone that might give them poor advice. I took a load of high school boys, special needs boys, on a field trip, and these three boys decided to give each other dating advice. You want your kids getting their advice from you, trust me. So, be their safe haven. That's all I'm going to say. One of the ways that we try to keep communication open with our kids, you have to be creative, because as your kids get older, it gets harder. But when your children, you know, pick that time of day that's your conversation time, whatever that might be before bed. But what we would do with our son is we would say things like, what was the best part of your day? Tell me about the best part of your day. And then we would say, tell us about the hardest thing that happened today. And depending on what that hard thing was, then you can go, you know what, let's talk a little bit more about that. What can we do differently so that next time that won't happen? You know, whatever that is. Don't ask questions where they can answer with one word. How was your day? Fine. There's no communication there. So one of the ways that you become that safe haven is by keeping those lines of communication open. So in terms of supporting a child that lives with special needs, especially that's been bullied, there's some really practical, tangible things you can do, depending on the age of your child. Have your child color them a picture or make them a card. Then this special kiddo can have this thing that goes, I got this. I have a friend. It's a very simple act, but it's a tangible, visible way for them to feel like I have at least one friend. So teach kindness in simple ways. It does not have to be a huge act. The challenge comes in a whole lot of areas when those disabilities are what we would call invisible. Like, if I walked into this room, I'm not going to immediately, not knowing Bree, go, oh, yeah, what an angry lady. Right? So some of our kids, my son, he could come in here right now, and he could probably handle himself for about an hour or so, and you guys would never know that he lived with autism. Sue would know. She's my cohort in crime, but she would know because, first of all, she knows him, but she's also been around a lot of kids with autism because of her position as a school psychologist, so she would know that. But most of you wouldn't. And the quickest or the fastest growing disability in the United States, according to the Center for Disease Control in May of last year, is autism. It's 1 in 68 children now. It's 1 in every 42 boys. And that's not even taking into account things like ADHD, Asperger's, which is on the same spectrum. So some of those disabilities you won't know about and your kids won't know about. And so again, there's these differences, but if you teach your kids to take time to get to know people, to be relational, whether they have a visible difference or not, teaching our kids by modeling, just, that's kind of the best way to do it. If a child with special needs has been bullied, their family does need extra support, but quite frankly, a family who has children that live with disabilities need extra support all the time. And some of the best ways you can do that is being purposeful in planning play dates, successful play dates. And we could do a whole half hour just on that. You can be intentional, like those 4 men were intentional, going, I gotta figure out a way to include this girl that's in my kid's preschool class who's living in a wheelchair. I want to find a way that my daughter can play with her and have it be successful. So it's going to take a little bit of extra thinking, but all of these kids should have a right to be included in things. And so some of the things that I still am very purposeful in when I have my son's class over, I have all his kids in his special needs class come over often, and but we're still very purposeful about it. It's not complicated, but we talk about it ahead of time. I talk with the moms whose kids have the harder behaviors, and I just plain ask them, what would make this day successful for your kid? What type of food? Because certain things, depending on the challenges, certain things can set them off. Smells can set them off. Noises can set them off. If you have a child that has some extra busy behaviors when they're really young, the family members may not know yet if they're living with a hidden disability. So be sure to say, have your child bring what makes them comfortable, and talk ahead of time about, if Johnny comes and he brings his favorite truck, today Johnny doesn't have to share that truck with you. We're going to let Johnny play with his own truck. So let them bring something. They're just practical little things that you can do to make them successful. Keep your play dates short so that they end wanting to come back. Kiddos with special needs, oftentimes, they have a time limit that they can keep it together. So it's better to have the time be short, so they want to come back and they view it successful and the families view it successful, and then next time, stretch it. But as a mom, probably one of the things that has been the most encouraging and the biggest blessing to me has been a lady that's in our life group. Every week she would come. She knows absolutely nothing about disabilities. She knows absolutely nothing about autism. She knows absolutely nothing about what it's like to raise a child with a special needs. So every week she would come and she would say, teach me one thing today. One small thing about autism, or one small thing that makes your life harder than mine. And she didn't want anything big, she just wanted one little thing. And that absolutely blesses me each time, because she's showing that we matter and that she wants to understand. Will she ever understand it all? No. I'm not sure I'll ever understand it all, and I'm living it. So, if a special needs kiddo, for example, is being bullied, that's just one of the things you can do, is to reach out to the mom and go, I am so sorry for what happened to Freddie on the playground today. How can I help you? How can I support you? So, communication, be open, ask the questions. Probably another real practical thing is, years ago I was a lunch buddy, so when your kiddos are in elementary school, be a lunch buddy to somebody with special needs. This little boy could not eat in the cafeteria because it smelled too strong and there were too many people and it was too loud. And so I would eat lunch with him. We would sit in a quiet pod. No friends, nobody spoke to him. He was one of those kids that would have walked through here and nobody would have said a word to, and he would have been silently bullied. So I would eat lunch with him, and once he got comfortable with me, I would take projects to do and games to play. Once he got comfortable, we decided to get a little bolder, and I asked the teacher if I could come in through the classroom right before lunch started. And so I got approval to do that, and I got approval from the young man's mom to bring McDonald's in. Now, McDonald's smells, right? You can smell McDonald's food everywhere. So I would walk through the classroom with McDonald's Happy Meal for my little buddy. Well, let me tell you, the other kids wanted to know what that was about. And so I would say, I'm coming to have lunch with my really good buddy, and I brought him lunch today. And they're like, oh. And suddenly this kid that they never even looked at or knew existed, suddenly they were going, who's your buddy? And so we would do that. And then next week I brought pizza in. You have to open the box to make it smell as much too. But so we would do that, and by the time the end of the year came, he didn't want me to come anymore because all these kids that didn't know he existed suddenly knew he existed, and he was now eating in the cafeteria and playing on the playground. I'm getting my, you have to be done soon warning. So I am, some of the other questions that came up were extracurricular activities. Everybody has an interest, so if you meet a kiddo that has special needs, they have an interest. Find out what the interest is, and then teach your child and you how to interact with them with their interests. So don't limit their extracurricular activities. Get them out in society, get them out, pick up their mat, carry them out, and let them participate in whatever they want to participate in and make it successful. One of the questions was, are there any ever-changing special education updates? Yes, minute by minute. So we have resources that we can get that to you. So I want to honor your time, so I am going to wrap this up. But one thing I want to say is, Sue, will you stand up? Wave. Sue is a co-leader in the Disabilities Ministry. She is a retired school psychologist, so she is one of those resources, especially if you have concerns about your child or you think that they need to be checked out by the school ahead of time for services, or if you have a kiddo in school that might need some support. Sue and I are both very easy to find. You can always call the church office and they'll give out our information, because you can ask us anything. So we're an open book, and we want to do the journey with you and help and support you however we can. So, I don't know if there are any questions or not, or if I'm bolting.
Will you be available maybe hanging around back here if anybody wants to ask you something?
I'm gifted at hanging around.
Okay, let's do that. Let's do that. Thank you.